go to Ryan and then come back to you when you can get yourself unmuted. So, Ryan.
Sorry. So you said that the moratorium is required to be discussed or approved of, requires the actions to be approved by the community. But I thought you also said something about the order isn't community linked. It's linked to developers or linked to like the council itself or the local governance instead of on the community basis. It's not like a town hall decision. It's decided by the council. Or something I thought you said. By governing body.
Yeah, that's right. The planning decision is taken by the local authority. So Mid Devon, South Hams, North Devon, whoever. But it's required of them that any of the planning matters raised as concern by the community have to be satisfied, and the community has to support the development. So they can't make a decision against that. So whilst the decision is made at the level of the local authority, the community is given a very unusual level of power in that decision. That's the difference. Is that clear?
Yeah, is it like okay, cool, yeah. That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, Doreen, can I come back to you?
Yeah, certainly. With this sort of moratorium being in place, has anyone ever tried to sort of get around it, or is there a way you can get around it?
It's national planning policy, so effectively there is no way around it. I don't know whether there's been any legal efforts to do that. You could legally challenge national planning policy, but that would be an extremely expensive and complex process. I think it speaks for itself that it basically halted onshore wind development. The industry just decided that was that.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess, with the indication that it may change is also being backed by, people putting pressure on government that, the policy has had impacts that they didn't want. Can I come to Michaela next? Michaela, are you there? You're on mute. And then we'll come to Daryl after Michaela.
Yeah, I'm here.
Did you have a question?
No, I think mine's been answered now by someone else.
All right, no, that's fine. Let's hear from Daryl then.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, Daryl, it sounds like we've probably got an answer to the first one as well, but ask it if you feel we haven't, and then maybe just ask the second one.
Yeah, we had a similar question about if there was any way of getting around the moratorium, but you've answered that. So I suppose we had another question of whether you could operate or develop a wind farm based on a change of land use, possibly, whether that would help on the basis that most land use for wind farms is agricultural. There was a question on that.
Not really, it's all in the same basket.
Yeah.
Sorry, Daryl, I interrupted you because the connection dropped.
Okay.
Those issues about a change of land use, consent for the structures and consent for the access roads, they're all in together in a planning decision. So you can't really split them up. The planning application contains all of them at once.
Okay, I know we've got a question from Jeff lined up.
Well, listening to everybody talking, my question is, we've got this problem, the government is behind with getting us to net carbon zero already. Surely it's about time to bring on a Kate Bingham type person and give them the authority to just say, look, we have to do this. How do we get there? Shoot the people with red pens, let's get on with it. I mean, it's a bit blunt, but.
Don't know if you want to make a comment on that one.
You won't be shot, proof.
It's more of it's not really a question, is it? But I mean, if I can turn it into a question, it is very peculiar. As a planner, it's very peculiar to have a policy of this nature existing. It has such a strong effect against the other policy messages that onshore wind, we need it. I think what I tried to outline as a policy approach to onshore wind would give control about where the best areas were for it and debate around that. But the ability for individual communities to veto it is extraordinary. by which I mean extraordinary rather than anything else.
Okay, we've got a couple of hands up. We've got a few more minutes there. So Matt, I think you had a question.
Yeah, so from the sounds of things, we can't proceed with any kind of turbine policy, or we can't actually build any without this policy change in government. So in which case we should maybe come up with an idea for applying public pressure on the government to change that policy in order to push things through, or not look at wind at all.
Yeah, I think it was if you search Google onshore wind moratorium, you'll see the announcement made last year that basically it was going to be lifted. So, I'm not a politician, but taking that at face value, I think we could assume that it will be lifted sometime soon. And consideration could turn to, therefore, when it is lifted, what should the recommendation to the Devon local authorities be in terms of perhaps fast tracking their approach to identify suitable areas and kind of bring up the policy that isn't there at the moment. That could be another response.
And I guess just to add to that, in the context of the Assembly, it's because of that announcement, one of the reasons it is sort of being considered and discussed here, because the other side of this is community, community support. Because actually, if communities aren't objecting, and that may be because of different types of conditions or whatever it might be, that there may be reasons that it wouldn't stop developments of some scale.
But would it just take
would
it just take one single person in that community to have an objection to still be a roadblock?
No, they've got to have a valid planning objection. But if they do, then that objection's got to be satisfied, which of course it's really hard to do because they had an objection in the first place. I do think it is it's been called a moratorium in kind of in the press for a good reason. But I think also the other thing to remember is that 2015 is quite a long time away. It was prior to all of the much better understanding of the climate issue, and so I would hope that the reason it's also being reviewed is it's seen as sort of things have caught up with it, or that we've moved on, and there's a need to approach this in a different way. As a planner, as I've said, it compared to how we approach everything else, it is really unusual, and it doesn't make full sense to me personally.
Claire, I can see you've got your hand up there.
It's just following on from that. It's the fact that it's kind of been 6 years since 2015, and I think you mentioned another factor was that the wind farm development had to be outlined in the local plans prior to 2015 to be considered. If I got that right, and if so, how frequently do those local plans get updated, and how do we kind of get proposals into them there so they can at least be in the pipeline, even if they were to get objected and turned over by the community?
Well, yes, basically the area of search, the suitable areas has to be in the local plan. You put an idea in my head which I haven't thought about, which is local authorities could actually identify areas where they would promote it, rather than just say this is a suitable area, actually say this is a really good area or the best area and we wish to see one here. So you could go a bit further. Just second question, local plans are supposed to be updated about every 5 to 8 years. There are some authorities in the country that have got ones which are 10 years or more old, but you get the picture. The picture is it's a very long-winded process. And therefore, my concern is that by the time a local plan is progressed to adoption, say 5 to 8 years' time, that's quite a long time in the future. But you do have examples of local authorities preparing specific packages of policies rather than the whole lot and accelerating them, because it's the most pressing issue to bring forward and adopt policy on. And Cornwall's a good example of this. They've produced a climate-specific planning policy document that just deals with the climate issues that the local plan didn't, because it's too out of date. So they've kind of just updated the most pressing and important bit of the local plan to do that, and that's happening faster. That might get adopted in, say, 3 years.
Okay, running out of time here, but I can see one more hand up. So we'll take Caroline's question and then we'll have to sort of save up any further questions, not necessarily for James, but we can come back to some of them potentially tomorrow. Caroline. You're muted at the moment, Caroline.
Thinking about technology changes going forward, a lot of the objections around the current wind farms are the noise, the strobe effect, etc., etc. But as technology develops and maybe we have things like solid state, etc., is there any process whereby these things can be brought into the cities, the towns and cities, rather than being stuck? I.e., there might be perfectly windy spots, but they can't happen for various other reasons. Is there any way, anything in the process which allows these new technologies to be put in when they become valid?
I have limited knowledge on this. What I do understand is that effectively what the wind industry is doing is it's favouring bigger and bigger turbines because they're much more efficient. So that's clearly not an urban solution. I also think the reason you see fewer turbines in urban areas is basically because of the wind being very disrupted by buildings and so on. So micro renewables, which is the small scale stuff like rooftop solar and so on, I haven't heard of an equivalent wind technology to that.
There is one I know, but I don't know if it's fully developed yet, but I know there's one that's about the size of an air conditioning unit, but whether it works or not is another matter. But it's available.
Okay, I'm going to draw to halt there and thanks, James.